in the small town of Coldwater, Nebraska, where the grain elevators cast long shadows and the wind carries the scent of diesel and dust, Lila Wren moved through life like a ghost. At 34, she was the kind of woman you'd pass without a second glance. Her faded blue apron hung loose over her frame, her dark hair pulled into a bun, so tight it seemed to hold her together. She worked at Hank's Diner, a squat brick building on Route 17, where the neon sign flickered, and the coffee was always a little burnt. Lila opened the diner at 4:30 a.m. Her sneakers crunching gravel before the stars faded. She closed it, long after the last trucker paid his tab. No one asked why she took every shift she could. No one asked much about her at all. Lila's life was stitched together with small invisible threads. She'd grown up with her aunt, Marla, a Vietnam War nurse, who taught her to listen more than she spoke. Marla's stories of soldiers, men and women who carried their scars quietly, shaped Lila. When Marla passed 5 years ago, she left Lila a locket with a tiny photo of a young soldier and a single rule: kindness costs nothing, but it's worth everything. Lila kept the locket tucked under her shirt, close to her heart, and a stray dog named Patch, with one floppy ear, curled up in her tiny apartment above a laundromat. The apartment was no paradise. The radiator hissed like it held a grudge, and the rent was always a week away from swallowing her whole. Last month, her neighbor bailed on their shared lease, leaving Lila with $87.14 in her account and a stack of bills. She didn't complain. She just worked harder, smiled at customers who tipped in nickels, and slipped Patch scraps of bacon from the diner. Coldwater wasn't kind to dreamers, and Lila had stopped dreaming long ago, but she noticed things others missed. The way a trucker's hands shook when he talked about his kid, or how the widow at table 3 always left half her pie uneaten. And she noticed the people who came in from the cold, asking for nothing but a glass of water, their eyes avoiding hers. Lila's days were a rhythm of wiping counters, refilling salt shakers, and dodging Hank's temper. Hank Tully, the diner's owner, was a man built like a barrel, with a voice that could crack glass. He didn't like handouts or troublemakers. Lila didn't argue, even when her paycheck was short or Hank snapped at her for chatting too long with customers. She just kept moving, her aunt's locket warm against her chest. Some nights, she'd sit with Patch, stroking his patchy fur, and whisper, "We're still here, aren't we?" But the truth was heavier than she let on. She was tired, not just from the double shifts, but from carrying a world that didn't seem to care. One chilly October evening, as rain streaked the diner's windows, the door creaked open. A man stepped in, soaked and shivering, his coat patched with duct tape. His boots left muddy prints, and his grey beard was matted with damp. He clutched a plastic bag like it was his only anchor. Lila, wiping a counter, looked up. Something in his eyes, worn but proud, reminded her of Marla's stories. This wasn't just a stranger. This was someone who'd carried more than the rain. The diner was quiet that evening. Save for the hum of the fridge and the patter of rain, the man hesitated in the doorway, water pooling at his feet. His coat, once a deep navy, was now a patchwork of stains, a faded army patch clinging to the shoulder. His hands, rough as sandpaper, trembled as he pulled off a soaked cap. He didn't sit, just stood by the corner booth, as if waiting for someone to tell him to leave. The few customers, a trucker and an old couple, glanced up, then away. There, silence louder than words. Lila crossed the floor, her apron damp from earlier spills. "Evening," she said softly, her voice steady but kind. "Can I get you something warm?" The man's eyes flicked up, then down, like he was afraid to hope. Just water, ma'am, he mumbled, voice gravelly. If it's no trouble, Lila saw the way his shoulders slumped. Not from defeat, but from years of carrying too much. She'd heard stories like this from Marla, soldiers who came home to a country that forgot them. She nodded and turned to the kitchen. A plate of meatloaf, returned untouched, sat under the heat lamp. Lila didn't think twice. She piled it high with mashed potatoes, added a slice of cornbread, and poured a steaming mug of coffee. Carrying it back, she set it in front of him. This was going back anyway, she said, her tone matter of fact. Coffee's on me. The man froze, his hands hovering over the table. I can't pay, he said, voice barely above a whisper. Lila smiled, small but real. It's paid for. He looked at her then, really looked, and something softened in his eyes. Name's Amos Reed, he said, almost like a confession. Used to be somebody once. He ate slowly, each bite deliberate, like he was remembering what food tasted. Lila noticed the way he sat, straight, despite the limp she'd seen when he walked in. He didn't ask for more, didn't complain, just thanked her with a nod when he finished. From across the room, Hank's eyes burned into her. She knew that look. Trouble was coming. Hank stormed over, his boots thudding. What's this? He barked, pointing at the empty plate. The diner went still. He was hungry, Lila said, her voice calm but firm. It was going to waste. Hank's face reddened. I told you no freebies. You're making me look weak. The old couple stirred their coffee faster. The trucker stared at his phone. Lila stood her ground. Take it out of my pay. Hank's hand slammed the counter. You're done, Lila. Out. Now. The words hit like a fist, but she didn't flinch. She untied her apron, folded it, and walked into the rain. Amos's dog tag, a small rusted thing he'd pressed into, her hand as thanks, warm in her pocket. Outside the cold bit her skin. Patch was waiting at home, and rent was due in a week. Her bank account read $53.22. Lila stood under the diner's awning, her breath visible in the air. Amos appeared from the shadows, his limp more pronounced. I'm sorry, he said, voice heavy. You shouldn't have paid for me. Lila shook her head. You're worth it, Amos. He pressed another dog tag into her hand. His spare, he said, and vanished into the night. Lila didn't know it yet, but that moment was the spark of something bigger. The rain didn't let up that night. Lila walked home, her sneakers squelching, her jacket clinging to her skin. Coldwater's streets were empty, the streetlights casting weak halos on the pavement. Her apartment smelled of damp plaster and dog food. Patch greeted her with a nudge, his one ear flopping as he curled against her. Lila sat on the sagging couch, Amos's dog tags in her hand. The metal was worn, the letters faint. Read, Amos T. Serial Namashanu 392. She traced them, wondering what battles he'd fought, what he'd lost. She checked her phone. $49, $11 now, after a late-night gas station run for dog food. Rent was due in 6 days. And Hank's words echoed, You're done. Lila wasn't surprised. She'd seen Hank fire people for less. But the silence in the diner stung more than his, shouting. No one had spoken up. The old couple, the trucker. They'd all looked away, as if her kindness was a crime. Lila didn't cry. Marla had taught her to keep her chin up, even when the world pushed her down. But the weight of it all, bills, loneliness, the dog tags, felt heavier than ever. The next morning, Coldwater woke to a grey dawn. Lila pulled on her only clean sweater and headed out to job hunt. The town's main street was a patchwork of closed shops and faded signs. She tried the gas station, the hardware store, the bakery. At each stop, the managers were kind but firm. "Heard about the diner," one said, sliding her application back. "Can't afford the drama." Another just shook his head. "Hank's got a big mouth." By noon, Lila's feet ached, and her hope was thinner than her wallet. She passed a bus stop where Amos sat, hunched under a tarp, his plastic bag clutched tight. Lila stopped, pulling a granola bar from her pocket, her lunch, and set it beside him. "Stay warm, Amos," she whispered. He looked up, eyes bright despite the cold. "You're too kind, miss," he said. "Don't let this town break you." Lila smiled, but her throat tightened. She walked away, unaware of a woman across the street, filming her quietly on a phone. That video, shaky and raw, hit the internet by afternoon. It showed Lila's final moments in the diner, her calm defiance, Hank's red-faced rage. Comments poured in, sharp and cruel. She broke the rules. Probably stole food before. Attention seeker. Lila didn't see it. Her phone was too old for social media, and she was too busy knocking on doors. But the video spread, and with it, whispers of her story. Not everyone was unkind. Some saw something else in Lila. A quiet strength, a refusal to look away. Back at her apartment, Lila sat, with Patch, the locket open in her hand. Marla's soldier stared back, young and serious. "Kindness costs nothing," Lila murmured. But it had cost her everything. Her job, her stability. Still, she didn't regret it. Amos's face, the way he'd eaten like it mattered, stayed with her. As the sun dipped low, a black SUV rolled through Coldwater's streets, unnoticed. Inside, a woman in uniform watched the viral video. Her jaw tight, she made a call. "We found him," she said. "And we found her. The wheels were turning, and Lila's world was about to change." Dawn broke over Coldwater. The sky bruised purple and gold. The town was still, the air sharp with the smell of wet asphalt. Lila woke to Patch's whining, her alarm buzzing at 5 a.m., out of habit, no job to go to. But she got up anyway, pulling on her worn coat. She didn't know that across town, something was stirring. At 6:30 a.m., the first black SUV pulled onto Main Street, followed by another, then another. They stopped in front of Hank's diner, engines idling like a low hum of purpose. One by one, soldiers stepped out. Men and women in crisp uniforms, Army, Marines, Air Force, formed a silent line along the diner's front. Their boots gleamed, their faces unreadable. There were dozens, then hundreds, stretching down the block. Passers-by stopped, phones out, whispers spreading like wildfire. Shopkeepers pressed their faces to windows. Coldwater hadn't seen anything like this. Not ever. Inside the diner, Hank was stacking menus. Oblivious until the bell above the door chimed. A woman in an army uniform stepped in, her posture rigid, her chest heavy with medals. "I'm looking for the owner," she said, voice calm but sharp. Hank fumbled a menu, his face paling. "That's me," he croaked. The woman removed her cap. "Colonel Sarah Reed," she said, "daughter of Amos Reed." The air in the diner stopped moving. Customers froze, forks halfway to their mouths. Hank's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Sarah's voice cut through the silence. "The man you called a beggar yesterday. He's my father. In 1991, during Desert Storm, he dragged 3 soldiers out of a burning Humvee. Took shrapnel in his leg. Never asked for a medal. That was his silver star you mocked." She held up a framed citation. The paper yellowed but proud. Hank's eyes darted, searching for an ally. The diner was a graveyard of silence. After my mom died, Sarah continued, he fell apart. PTSD. He didn't want help, didn't want pity. He vanished. We searched for years, and then we found him here, fed by a woman you fired. She stepped closer, her voice softening but no less fierce. Lila Wren gave him dignity when you gave him nothing. Outside the soldiers stood unmoving, a wall of respect. A crowd was growing. Locals, kids, even the bakery manager, who'd turned Lila away. Sarah turned to the door. Bring her in. A young private had found Lila at her apartment, banging on the door until she answered, bleary-eyed and confused. A reporter was there too, breathless. They're asking for you, Lila. The soldiers. You have to come. Lila followed, her heart pounding, Patch's leash in one hand. As she reached the diner, the soldiers parted, and 200 hands rose in a salute. Lila stopped, her breath catching. She wasn't anyone special, just a waitress. But in that moment, she felt seen. Lila stood frozen, the weight of 200 salutes pressing against her chest. The soldiers' hands were steady, their eyes locked on her, not with pity, but pride. Coldwater's Main Street was a sea of uniforms, the crowd behind them buzzing with camera phones and murmurs. Lila clutched Patch's leash, her other hand brushing the locket under her sweater. She didn't understand why they were here. Not really, but the dog tags in her pocket felt heavier than ever. Colonel Sarah Reed stepped forward, holding a small black case. My father wanted you to have this, she said, opening it to reveal a silver star, its edges catching the morning light. Lila shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. I can't. It's his. Sarah's eyes softened. He pawned it years ago to feed a family. You reminded him why he fought. For people like you, who see the ones no one else does. She pressed the metal into Lila's hand. It was warm, like it carried Amos's heartbeat. The crowd was silent now, even the kids holding their phones. Sarah continued, her voice carrying over the street. You didn't just feed my father. You gave him back a piece of himself, and you paid a price for it. Lila's throat tightened. She thought of Hank shouting, the diner's silence. The job applications slid back across counters. She hadn't done it for praise. She'd done it because it was right. Hank stood in the diner's doorway, his face ashen. The soldier's presence was a judgment he couldn't escape. Sarah turned to him, her voice cold. You run a business, fine, but you forgot what it means to be human. Hank shrank back, disappearing into the kitchen. The crowd murmured, some nodding, others filming. Lila didn't look at him. Her eyes were on Amos, who'd appeared at the edge of the crowd, leaning on a cane, his coat still tattered but his head high. He limped toward her, the soldiers parting to let him through. You didn't have to do what you did, he said, his voice rough but clear. But you did. That's why they're here. Lila met his gaze, her own eyes burning. You're worth it, she said again. The same words she'd told him last night. Amos smiled, faint but real. And for the first time, Lila saw peace in his face. The moment broke. As a young girl, no older than 9, pushed through the crowd. She held a crumpled dollar and a drawing of a heart. I saw the video, she said, to Lila. I want to help someone too. Lila knelt, her hands shaking, and took the dollar. You already are, she whispered. The crowd stirred, the air alive with something new, hope, maybe, or the promise of change. Lila didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. The diner closed within a week. Hank's suppliers pulled out, his staff quit, and veterans. Groups picketed the entrance. A full lease sign went up. The neon open 24 hours gone dark. Coldwater moved on, but it didn't forget. Across town, in a repurposed warehouse. The lights burned late. The Coldwater Community Kitchen, backed by a veterans non-profit, had opened its doors, and Lila was at its heart. They'd offered her the manager role days after the soldiers' salute. She hadn't sought it, but she took it because it felt like Marla's locket had guided her there. The kitchen was alive with noise, pots clanging, laughter, the smell of stew and fresh bread. Former soldiers chopped vegetables beside teenagers. Retirees served coffee to single dads. Patch, now the kitchen's mascot, lounged on a windowsill, his one ear twitching at every sound. Lila moved through it all, her apron swapped for a clipboard, but her quiet smile unchanged. She didn't talk about the video or the soldiers. She just worked, making sure no one left hungry. Amos had a place now, a VA housing unit nearby. Sarah visited often, and sometimes younger soldiers came to hear his stories, not just of Desert Storm, but of the battles fought in Coldwater's alleys, where survival was its own war. Lila stopped by when she could, bringing Patch. They'd sit, Amos and her, not saying much, the dog tag still in her pocket. The silver star rested in a small box by her bed, next to Marla's locket. Some nights, she'd hold both, whispering, "Kindness costs nothing." The real change came quietly, like dawn creeping over the plains. One afternoon, a boy, maybe 10, walked into the kitchen with a jar of coins. "My dad says you're a hero," he said, pushing it toward Lila. "Can this feed someone?" Lila knelt, her heart full. "It'll feed a lot of someone's," she said. She placed her hand over her chest, the way the soldiers had, and the boy grinned. Coldwater wasn't perfect. The video faded, the hashtags moved on, but those who'd seen Lila's stand, really seen it, carried it with them. She didn't march or shout. She just gave a man a meal when the world looked away. And that was enough to wake a town. This story isn't just about Lila or Amos. It's about us, how we treat the people we pass every day, the ones on park benches, in grocery lines, or at our own tables. Kindness doesn't need a spotlight. It's quiet, like a meal shared in the rain. We'd love to hear from you. Have you ever seen someone stand up when it was hard? Share your story below. If this touched you, like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes in quiet courage. Here, we tell stories for those who know what dignity means. Because some heroes don't wear uniforms.